Greetings. I'm Steve, and I'd like to thank you for joining the Architect and the Executive podcast, where we discuss technology, philosophy, leadership, personal development, and much more. The theme for each episode varies as we endeavor to examine various topics from our unique points of view. I hope you enjoy this episode of The Architect and the Executive. In this episode, we talk about low-code, platform versatility, how low-code differs from more traditional development, and how to know if your project is right for low-code. We also talk about the SDLC, which we know all developers follow in every project, right? Please enjoy this episode of The Architect and the Executive. Wardrobe and styling for this episode provided by Glow Your Soul, your one-stop shop for custom t-shirts, mugs, cups, candles, and jewelry. Glow Your Soul also provides massage therapy and Reiki healing. Check them out at glowyoursoul.com. Welcome in, folks, to another episode of The Architect and the Executive. I'm here with Imran on another lovely day. Imran, how are you doing today?
I'm good, Steve. How are you doing today?
Really well. Another fantastic week in the bag. We're actually recording on a Friday today, which is a little out of character for us. We typically do Thursdays, but all the other things, right, having to be present, we decided that Friday was going to give us a lot better chance to really dig into this episode, which is all about low code, something you teased in our last episode that we're going to do a series on low code and what that means to us and why we think it's important for everybody that's listening.
That's right, Steve. We're going to talk about how we use low code at scale in an enterprise environment. You know, we've been in a pretty unique place for the last few years that leverages a low code platform, for a lot of things. And over the few years, we've definitely learned a lot about how we're using low code and how it should be, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's funny. I think back about, where we were nearly 3 years ago and where we are now, and the picture of if we were to draw an application diagram from then to now, you wouldn't even know that it was the same company, let alone the same platform. It's so different.
Right. And it's allowed us to do many things. I mean, we came into a situation with a monolithic app that we were able to break down into small services relatively quickly. And the number of new services that we deployed last year, I think, was pretty phenomenal. So to be able to do that, it goes to say how quick you can go. But maybe we should get in and talk a little bit about what is low code.
Yeah, I think that's a great place to start. And you mentioned something just now. We built a monolithic app in low code, so it can be done. I'll take the first stab at what is low code, and it's a platform that enables rapid application delivery with limited need to, I'll say, hand code or hard code or write methods, and it gives you the ability to set it up fairly quickly and deploy it equally as quickly.
Right. I'm sure there's a proper definition for this. I don't know if you'd classify it as a fourth or fifth generation programming language, right? If you talk about going all the way down to the machine level and then kind of how we build layers on top of that, more human readable languages like Java and JavaScript and, as the generations go up. So low code, essentially, it's another layer on top, which allows you to model. So versus a code base, you have a model and you can visually model your app. And then the model will interact on the next level and write the Java code for you behind the scenes, at least depending on the platform you use, right? So we use a specific low-code platform called Mendix that you've heard us talk about a lot, and we'll go into more in depth. But that's, the technology stack it sits on, and it does the database scripting, and a lot of the things that you might normally have to worry about, it handles for you.
Yeah, that is the best part. And because we do use Mendix, that also comes partially as a platform. So you don't have to, you can self-host, but in our case, we've used the Mendix platform for most things, which really does give you low code and platform as a service. So it's really a one-stop shop. There's, built-in story management, bug management, all of those things along with the modeler, and, you build and you deploy right to a temporary cloud app if necessary to go test things out. So it is a full-featured package for us, the Mendix platform, and I'm sure others are very similar.
Right. I think they consider it an app platform as a service. So it kind of combines all that stuff together, right?
There you go. Yeah, you gotta go make a new word, a new acronym for those things, right? We're a long ways from software as a service now, because we're using this app platform as a service to build software as a service. Man, it feels like we're going to have to break through the fourth wall. I'm not sure what that means, but that's usually what they say around that time. So when you think about, when you think about low code, what got you into it? Why low code for you?
So for me, I wasn't a traditional programmer. I learned how to program in the 8th grade and learned some basic programming. And a couple of years later, I learned C++ in high school. And I decided that I was never going to work as a programmer. All right. It was just way too tedious for me. And so I kind of jumped into all the other areas of IT, right? Infrastructure. Right. And when I say infrastructure, I was literally physically building server racks, and server maintenance meant to open them up and blow dust out of them, versus a lot of the virtualization and stuff we have today with things like AWS and cloud services, right?
Yeah.
So way back when, that's how I got started. And so for me, I was moving into doing web development, getting into PHP and HTML, CSS, JavaScript, those technologies, and working on some web apps. I had an opportunity at a company I was working at to move over to the dev team from the infrastructure team and start maintaining the websites. At that same time, the company happened to be switching over to Mendix or learning Mendix, and there was an open seat in the Mendix class. So I jumped into it and learned it. And so for me, it just helped me take off because, now I'm able to program and I can do it without having to hunt down semicolons and things like that. And I can focus more on the concepts of what I'm building and less so on the syntax of the structure of how I'm building it. Right?
Sure.
And so for me, that's how I got into it. And then it became I learned the studio, the modeler really well, and just kind of ended up, taking off with it. And then I had an opportunity to come, work with you and build a whole low-code team of developers, which was a unique concept. And so, it's just been really fun.
Yeah, I feel like we've kind of blazed a path there, right? Now there's a lot of other people that have big teams, and there's, of course, consulting companies out there and partners that work with Mendix that have really big teams. But from a company standpoint, we've really pushed that boundary and built out a pretty amazing set of contributors in our group that are employees and some other third-party companies we work with. It's been pretty interesting. I like some of the things that we've looked at, talking about demand for apps, right? Everybody wants to build an app. Everybody's got one. Every person you talk to is like, oh, I'm working on an app. Well, low code does make that easier. We've seen a lot of folks, be able to bring in a new idea, turn it around, create a prototype, and we see it. And we can either say yes or no. And is this a good idea? Is it a bad idea? I think the other piece of that, though, is how do you know if it's right for low code? So we work with a number of technologies. There's a number of ways to go, and not everything should be done in low code. I think Mendix even says that right up front. Make sure you know what it is you're trying to do. What are some of the things you think about as you look at a project for should this be low code?
So that's a good point. Mendix does make that. And so we have to kind of look at, how much are we going to iterate over this? Is it something that's going to be highly transactional? We're going to be putting a lot of changes into it. If it's something we might build as a one and done and not really come back and iterate over it much, then it may not be worth building in a low code platform or something where you have a subscription service to maintain, right?
Right.
You could build it in something and it's not going to come back. And so some of those things come into play. I'm also kind of biased because that's my strong suit when I look at it, right?
Sure.
From the developer architecture side, right? And it's the easiest thing for me to integrate. How do you look at it as a software delivery executive? How do you decide what is the right technology stack in the moment?
It's a little different for me. I try to look at things about, what's my end goal? What is it that I want to do? And at the same time, what resources do I have available? What makes the most sense? Where does it tie in? Or, what things do I need to integrate with? And do they make sense for, easily connecting from one app to another or adding on a piece? So I really start from that basis of what is it I'm trying to do? Do I need a easy to use visual interaction for the user at the end, where they want to be able to, type in some information and then go on to the next piece, maybe do business rules related on it. It makes pretty good sense. Are they trying to do BI style reporting and they want to go make custom reports and make things ad hoc on the fly and get all sorts of data and searches? It doesn't make as much sense, right? We've learned that over time. While some dashboard information is good, it really depends on how you've modeled your data as to whether or not using, a low-code platform is really a good way to then summarize that data later. It may not be. And that's one of the key pieces for me that I think about is where is the data going to be used? How will it be used at the end? And what are we doing along the way? And that has to come in up front so you make that right choice first.
Yeah, definitely a lot to think about, right, when planning a project. We look at Forrester and Gartner are kind of authorities in their areas, and they talk a lot about low code. I think, you probably heard some of these words coming up in their publications for the first time whenever they did.
For sure.
And there's plenty of platforms out there, Pegasystems, OutSystems, Betty Blocks, I think Salesforce has stuff in it. And a lot of cloud platforms have some sort of visual model or low code way. You have these website builders like Wix and WordPress that allow people to get things up and they can get modules. A lot of times it's community based, right?
Sure.
But who's the target market for this, right? And let's look at, the official marketing and we say, who's really that target person to get into low code, right? Why do we need low code? Well, definitely something we all see is that businesses are becoming more and more technology focused, and everything is about, like you said, apps for this, apps for that. But not every business has a full-fledged software development team. And even when they do, they can't build every little thing, right? And you look at, there's always been these business users who would do some really awesome stuff with data in Excel. And, right. So you have these Excel whizzes, and they kind of get to the point, like, I think first it's like a gateway drug, right? So Excel is where you come in, and then you start using pivot tables. And you're like, I can do some real awesome stuff with data with pivot tables. And then you're like, man, but there's just some little functions. I want some conditionals. So you start learning some VB scripting, right? And you
that's right. Macros. VBA and macros.
Right. And that's the next layer, right? And so then you're like, oh, cool. Now I'm making this do things, and it can do things based on inputs. And so now I've got this awesome program. It's in Excel. And, we've been using this for so long in our department, and so-and-so left who built it 10 years ago, and it's teetering to this file size that it's almost unimaginable to handle. And we just need to be able to get in and put one value and get an output. So, the person who was able to build that and then can then drive further and say, okay, I want to build a program. I mean, you're not too far away. You have data.
You're right there.
It's relational in your tabs, your worksheets in Excel. And then now you have functions, you have logic, business rules you're building on this data to kind of either transform it or do something, right?
Yeah.
And calculate things. So your next step is to build an app, build a program. And, what would you do that in? Are you going to learn a bunch of different languages and then kind of go down that road? And some people do, and then they become developers. But some people like to have the tool that's going to just let them be that much more efficient in their job and maybe automate something that they do. And so here's where that low-code platform comes in, and it's good for, technology executives to say, how can we involve more of the business or more of have the concept of a citizen developer, that can actually go build things in a platform that allows them to collaborate and, get what they need done.
Yeah, you're empowering that user who might go learn Access, or back in the day, they might have learned Fox Pro, and they probably hated themselves for it. But now, today, you could take, instead of doing VBA, you could go do Mendix or any other low code and start with your spreadsheet and use that and understand where it needs to go. And now, because you've put it into that platform, you can now do more with it, right? Think about the things that we do. You start with some pretty basic data, and then you build in some workflow. And then somebody throws in an approval, and then this other thing can happen. And all of a sudden, you've got those base blocks for how do I turn this into a full-fledged application without really having to go learn, to your point earlier, C++ or even C# or Python or any of those things. You can actually build all of that in. You can figure out how to get there. And there is some knowledge required to do it and do it well, and things to think about. And I know, you and I have discussed that we'll touch on some of the challenges in the next part of this series. But if you're paying attention to what you're doing and you know what your goals are, you can pretty easily create an app that gives you, a considerable amount of functionality for moving and using and making that data that you've spent so much time with valuable to someone, probably you and maybe someone else.
Absolutely. So, all right. So now we've decided that in this project, we're going to use a low-code platform. In your experience over the last few years, what would you advise? So what do you need to think about before you get started with this low-code project?
Yeah, that example we just gave kind of shows how it can grow, right? Really organically, where you're starting with that huge spreadsheet and it's turning into something else. I suspect that most of the people that are listening have been in a situation where they created a proof of concept, and that proof of concept ended up going to production, and then they had that same thing that they had to maintain for 5 years. Same thing can happen with low code. You can turn something out that really works. I think it's important to me, and what we've really learned is that as you're building, you need to start thinking about who are your users, because you're probably building it for yourself. Once you add another user, what do they need? And is there a management layer? Like, is your boss or your manager or your team lead going to want to know something different about this data? You need to build that in early. You need to be thinking about, how do I manage the usage of my app? For example, if you want to know how long does it take someone to go from point A to point B in whatever it is your data's about, you have to build that in. If you leave it out, it won't just magically be there at the end. You can't go back and figure it out. You need to think about what's your outcome, what's your desired use of it. Now, that's true of every software program. But the analogy that we're walking through the low code is, how can you do that quickly? And it is fairly simple to do, but you really need to think, how else will this be used? Who are the other stakeholders who might want to use this data when I get done, and what are their needs? That to me, I think, is one of the biggest things we've run into that we have to go back and really think about as we're building and designing.
So what you're saying is I can't just sit down at a low-code development tool and just start building and make beautiful production-ready apps?
I mean, you can definitely make production-ready apps. Will they be beautiful? Will they meet all of your other functional requirements you didn't know you had? Not without some planning. Will they give you the basic functionality? No doubt. But will you be able to go back and get the metrics about how long it takes to get through your process at every step of the way if you don't build in those checkpoints? No. But by the way, no language does that, right? That's not anywhere. That's not magical. It's just in a low code, when you're graphical and you're thinking about your process flow, it's so easy to get caught up in, where does this box go? How does that look? We talked in another episode about, me with mind mapping, and I got so focused on making my map pretty, it wasn't functional. You can get caught up in any language, obviously, doing that. We talked about premature optimization and other things. Mm-hmm. That can happen here, but you just need to think about, what is it that I want at the end? And if you spend a little bit of time up front on that, you'll be a lot happier along the way as you go.
Yeah, that's a good point. One of the key words or buzzwords here that we use when we talk about low code is rapid development or rapid application development. And it means just what it sounds like. You can build stuff really fast. Right. And that's good and bad, because, yeah, sure, you can get something to market in 10 days. But that doesn't guarantee it's going to be good. And so what that means is, while you're building and putting out stuff really fast, you could also be really building something terrible really fast and building up a lot of technical debt really fast, as you go along, right?
Yeah, it gives you that chance to fail fast, though, right? And in those cases, hopefully you realize it. And the beauty of the low code, where you're modeling out your data and your workflow, and you're really, in a lot of cases, dragging and dropping pieces in. If you realize that you didn't do something, you can go at it, right? It's easy to go back and change. So none of the stuff that we're saying is written in stone. You're not chiseling this in anything. You spend a couple hours and you're like, oh, I forgot to add this in. All right, well, go refactor that process and add in what you needed, right? Add in some other data. Rethink how you did something. make sure that whatever it is you're trying to work with makes sense. I think the other big thing for me as you're working with Mendix or really any low code is understanding what the best practices are. So some things are easy to get by, and I've given other talks in other places about some of the entities that we have in some of our apps that are way, way outside of the normal best practice bounds.
Right.
Sometimes there's a business need for it, but you have to understand that comes as a trade-off, right? There is a performance penalty when you have an entity in a low-code environment that has 106 properties on it. That's a lot. And when you're trying to do things and 6 of them are calculated on the fly and 3 others get updated by 2 things, and you really do need to stop and think about what does it mean when I'm working with one piece of data versus 100 versus 100,000. What does my app look like? And again, this is for any language. It's not just low code, but it's super easy to gloss over because you're maybe not spending all the time trying to do a normalized database. This is entity relationships and you're building them as you go. So you don't necessarily have to spend all that time up front or have that background knowledge to say, oh, this should be 5 levels of normalization. You're probably never going to have that conversation while you're doing this, building out your entity model in your app, which is probably good.
Yeah, I think I can summarize that by something I used to say, back when I was doing desktop support, users would often complain to me that their computer was stupid. And I had to remind them that, it's a tool, and the tool is only as smart as the person who's using it.
Yeah, well,
you gotta keep that in mind.
I just want to say to that, my computer's really stupid sometimes. Just saying.
Too easy.
Yeah,
So let's talk about some of the differences between, rapid development or visual modeling versus traditional coding or development, right?
Sure.
When we build an application and as we talk about technology stack, what do we mean by that, right? We mean what's driving the data layer, what are the business rules built in, how's the front end rendered, like what's driving all this, right? What are the technologies and the languages behind all that?
Right.
And so, whether you have back-end code that's writing front-end code for you or whatever it is and things are interacting, you generally in a traditional application, if you're going to be developing the full stack, you may need to learn anywhere from 3 to 5 different technologies or languages, right?
Potentially.
I'm not even including things like infrastructure or how you may get your app into people's hands, but just talking about the act of building it and having something working, right? And
yeah,
that's the benefit that you get from low code is that you can do this all in your modeler, right? Or the visual model. And Mendix has 2 products. They have Studio and Studio Pro. And Studio is a web-based version of the modeler, and Studio Pro is a desktop version. And it's meant more for the pro developer. And as we talk about this, it's almost like this continuum of development where you go from the business user to the advanced business user, citizen developer, to the professional developer who really needs to do that, final layer to make it really production ready, more than just a small prototype or an internal app, right?
Right.
On the team, that you lead, there's a large group of professional low-code developers, and we work it that way. So, but in the professional low-code developer though can do all of the full stack in the modeler, right? They can do their database design. They can program in all their business rules and logic, all the server-side stuff. They can build their pages out and do their front end. They have concepts like nano flows, and you have things that can execute on the client that you can build and work in. So you're almost replacing all of these things. Of course, with Mendix, you can extend it. If you know how to program in Java, then you can program your own Java actions and extend something beyond what the modeler could provide or what Studio could provide. You write widgets using JavaScript and XML, and you can create your own front-end widgets in whatever library you'd like to kind of build things, and just there's a way to build them and integrate them in.
Yeah. One of the things I really enjoy about Mendix is you don't necessarily have to be a CSS wizard either. A lot of things when you're working in React, or maybe you're really right in that really low level coding on the front end, you have to be really good at CSS, which I never really was. So that's a challenge that Mendix abstracts for you. You can still build beautiful things and you can add your own custom style sheets and everything, but Mendix makes that part exceptionally easy, right? They have their own base style kit. And once you build out what you want that to look like, it's easy to apply everywhere. That's been one of the better things for us, is that we have a base project that we start everything new from. So everything has that same look and feel. We don't have to go and figure out how to go do all the settings. It's all built in. And that's really simple for the consistency from app to app. Once you go from your first one and you realize how easy it was and you build the second one, you can make them look very, very similar without too much trouble.
Right. We can create modules, which are just these individual blocks of functionality. And there's things that we can download from a public app store, right? A very community-driven thing where there's a lot of functions and features that are already pre-made. They even have template projects. But internally, since we have such a big practice, we created our own private app store. Well, it's a construct that Mendix provides, but we populated it with widgets and modules. And every time we build something that could be reusable, we build it and we publish it so that the next person who's working doesn't have to put in the energy to rebuild that feature and function. So, but better than a shared library because it's not all tied together.
Right. Yeah, very true.
Including the theme, right? The Atlas UI framework is what you're referring to, that Mendix provides to help do some good UX design and get all the elements that you're used to maybe in some other libraries that you've been working with.
Yeah, it's kind of that same idea of like a bootstrap, right? It comes with a pretty standard frame for how things should look. And then it makes it super simple to use. The App Store is probably one of the biggest benefits that we've had, especially internally, as we share modules, or somebody creates a service and they create here's how to consume the data from my service module, right? That's one of the requirements we have. If you're providing data, also provide something that consumes your data so people can see how to use it, to set that up and make that easy. It has actually helped us quite a bit. Now, those things can be done in any language, right? You have, NPM and RPM and all these other package managers. There's a lot of things. Microsoft has one now as well. It's all there. It's in everything. So really whatever language you want to work in, you have these benefits. But the beauty of the way that Mendix has built this out is that it's in a low code environment too, that you can literally import someone else's work and start working on it just like you can in any other, development language. That's a pretty good benefit for that Mendix has added for all of us.
Right. And so as we talk about, I'd asked you a question earlier, do we just get in and start working? Does it replace anything else? And one of the things that I've learned over the years that, you've known and you've been working on as we come together is that Mendix replaces one part really of the whole software delivery lifecycle, right?
Yeah.
And that is the development, right? And there's a little bit on the design side, the development, but it doesn't mean that you don't need business analysts or people figuring out requirements, or that you don't need product owners who own the process and know what's going in and out and can communicate with business people, right? You still need to do QA and have a formal QA environment engagement with people that are focused on and all the types of testing, right? Whether you're doing functional testing, automated, performance load testing, exploratory, security testing, things like that.
Even unit testing, right? You still need people to be thinking about the entirety of the software development lifecycle. So if we go back to the analogy we started with right at the start, you've taken your crazy spreadsheet that's grown over the last 5 years, you've turned it into an app, and now more people, because, you've shown it to other folks in your organization, are like, ooh, yeah, boy, I want access to that. And could it do this or could it do that? That's where software development comes in. That's where thinking about the delivery of those features really matters. That is one of the things that I spend a lot of time thinking about. How do we deliver functionality that adds value to our users and do that in the best way possible, regardless of the language, right? Again, this isn't just low code. This is part of software, the software delivery lifecycle, right? SDLC. It is important. You need those people up front who can sit down with the business, because now your app is being used by, let's just say, one department. But another department sees it and is like, ooh, yeah, I want in too. Well, you need that product owner to sit up front and say, here's what we need from your app. And maybe the other business unit has a product owner that says, well, here's what we need. And now you have competing priorities. You may have different functionality, different needs. It may, diverge from your one app, or perhaps you just have to figure out how to handle both. But having that whole process, especially when you think in an agile way, how could I work on some of that? Demo to you. Here's what I heard you say, and here's what I've turned it into. Demo it, get feedback, iterate all the way through. And you really do need to have the right people with the right mindset out there as part of the project, right? Again, this is every language, but in a low code environment, that one developer could just keep going and going and going. And then all of a sudden you have a huge app that doesn't do the things that your users wanted because you ignored some of the key pieces of software delivery.
That's very important. What are some of the lessons that you've learned when it comes to managing the infrastructure and environments, or things like code promotion, delivery, containers, things like that, and how you manage that kind of stuff, high availability, right? Where do those things come in?
Yeah, that's really been a really interesting part for us, because the way we've grown, the way our apps have grown, the number of users, we have a lot of people that use our apps every day. It's very, it's consistent, heavy usage. So the beauty of having the platform as a service, and we use the Mendix Cloud, is that, we can see what's happening, and we can add size, we can add resource, we can upgrade environments. It's not, turn of a button. There's still a little downtime to do it, but it is something that we can see and that we do keep an eye on. So as you think about, taking that spreadsheet now into an app that your whole company's using, 300-400 people maybe, you do need to think about what sort of environment do I want? And you have your development environment, and then you might have a QA environment. And then you might have a node that is all about, performance testing or acceptance testing, or both, where you can, go publish your changes 2 weeks in advance and let your business users come in and review it. And if they're good with it, then after that 2 week period, you promote it to production. Those are things that we've learned, processes that we adapted into our process. The additional pieces we grew and matured our software delivery to get better at making sure we could know what was coming and what we were delivering, and tell our users ahead of time so that we weren't surprising them. Early on, I think, you probably remember we used to, kind of figure out what all was there and then go do a build, and our users would be like, oh, there's this new thing. And like, oh, we didn't tell you guys we were deploying. Oh, sorry. Right now we have a really formalized process where we know, a couple weeks ahead of time, usually roughly when we'll deploy. We do release notes. We have all of those pieces of a very mature process. And then adding into that, which we'll talk about in probably another segment here, is some of the, what do you have to do for audit or compliance or tracking changes or getting sign-offs? All of that is important, but it's something, to come back around to where you were on what do you need for environments. You need more than one. You need to be thinking, Mendix 7, Mendix 8, do enable horizontal scaling, which is pretty amazing. That's something that we're actually, pretty close now to rolling out in some of our apps, for being able to put up multi front ends, which, certainly improves your uptime. If you can have 2 or 3 or 4 front ends running, and you only need 2, and you have more, and you can handle all that traffic, well, now you can do releases uptime, where you take one out of the cluster, upgrade it, take the next one out of the cluster, right? Roll that through. So you're slowly bringing up those things, and your users never notice. And, from a software organization like we are, that's a huge improvement. That's a great way to be able to deliver new functionality to our users. So it is, all of those things are possible, even when we're talking about low code. I suspect that some of the folks that have heard, Gartner or Forrester or someone else say, oh, low code, they're like, yeah, that's not for me. You can't do anything in that. That's no big deal. We're proving, opposite, right? We are showing that there's a different way. And I hope that's what people take away from today, that you can, provided that what you're trying to accomplish makes sense, right? In low code, you're not trying to do BI, because that's not it, right? You're not going to replicate Tableau in low code. Yeah. That's just not, it's not going to happen. Tableau might use some low code principles for you making reports, but you're not replicating it, right? That's not what it's about. But if you have a process driven, flow of data, it makes a lot of sense. And you can really run a high availability, high demand, high performance process in a low code environment.
Some of the lessons that I learned with managing, low code projects with many developers as we grew was some tenets don't go away, like branching and merging strategies, differing, conflict resolution, right?
Yeah.
There is subversion behind the scenes that's doing version control. But again, you don't have to worry so much about the interaction with subversion because the studio does all that for you. But you do have interface in there to manage branches and branch lines. And if you have multiple active development lines, then things like merging and conflict resolution are a very real thing. I remember the environment where I was in, where I first learned Mendix, there was a Java team there. And I think it was one person's full-time job to just keep track of merges between the development lines. Because they would develop in parallel on the main app, and so they would have constant things going. So you might have QA going on in 2 different releases at one time. And so, and it was a complex thing. And as we got in, and I started realizing very quickly that's going to become a thing in Mendix too. As we go from 5, 10, 15, 20 developers working on a project. And we alleviated some of that by breaking into smaller services. So now everyone's not working in one model. But for a while, we did have 3 teams working on the monolith. And, how we branched and how we did merges and those types of things still matter, right? And you may not hear about that up front as you're going through some of these things, but, they're definitely very much still there.
You don't think that's right in the brochure about, why choose Mendix? No, it probably isn't, but you're right. No. I remember those days where we had the conflicts and the things that got missed because someone didn't realize and they checked in, a version that was wrong, or they checked in their change into the mainline and overwrote somebody else's and we didn't realize it.
Right.
You're right.
Brought bugs back or whatever.
Oh,
right?
Man.
So
those are awful, right? As anybody that's involved in software delivery, you never want to do that. You don't want to lose functionality because of a merge. So that is important. Again, it's like any other platform though. Low code allows you to merge that in and manage it. You're right. It's built on subversion. You can make those things happen. You can do your changes. You can have multiple branches. I will say that having multiple branches where you have development going in all of those branches and merging it back to the master is hard in any language. Low code's no different, right? We did that for quite a while. That was kind of the way we solved that until we broke out, right? We had 3 different versions that were always being worked on and they would be constantly merged in. And that's how we would miss some things. But it can be done, but it does require a lot of patience and a lot of attention to detail for that. But again, that's part of software delivery. That's not part of low code. That's another piece. You've really, to your point early on, was you've replaced the modeler, the IDE that your developer is working in. You haven't really replaced a lot of the other things that are important.
No, it doesn't replace the process.
Not at all.
It allows some parts of the process to be more efficient, and it makes it easier to collaborate in other parts of the process.
Right.
But the process must still exist in order to ensure good quality and consistent delivery.
Yeah, and to deliver the features that your users are telling you they want, right? You can't get away from the process and then just assume that somehow you're going to sprinkle pixie dust and say, "Ooh, low code and pixie dust, it must be good." It doesn't work that way. I wish it did, but it doesn't. You still have to get in there. I think the other thing that I really learned was that the data modeling is very simple, but it still requires you to be thinking about what you want to accomplish, right? We touched on it a little that you can outpace the best practices pretty easily, but you still need to be thinking about things like, do I need to know every time this was updated? If I break out the attributes into multiple tables, how do I know when, what updates matter to the main object? Like, those sorts of things are still there. They're just entity related, but in some cases you have to handle it or think about it yourself to say, if I'm updating their home address, do I need to say that the user's regular account got updated? Maybe, maybe not. It just depends on what it is you're trying to do, but you have to think about those things and make sure that you're adding the proper fields in your entity to handle that so that you can then report on it or manage by it or use that around. And it's not, I think that was the hard part for me. It's not always obvious in the rapid process or in that IDE. It's not obvious all the time that that's required, right? That you have to go and add that too. They try to keep you on track on whatever you're trying to do. Let's stay rapid. Let's not be thinking about all the other things you also need to do, which is kind of a double-edged sword in my mind.
Yeah, some of the things that we put around the team, we plenty of experienced low-code developers that we had brought in, but the things that were immediately obvious that we needed to look at were things like governance and how we looked at architectural principles and standards of how we build and design, because you can end up with spaghetti code or spaghetti low code, whatever you want to call it.
That's right.
It can be spaghetti Frankenstein. I've heard a lot of different things.
Yeah.
Different pieces and parts. And if there's no cohesive strategy, at least on how you're building,
right,
and it can go south really quick. And we talked about code quality as well.
Yeah. Defensive programming.
Second episode, and the third one, right? Defensive programming.
Yeah.
And that's super important, right? You still have to look at all those tenets and principles of programming and apply them to them. And so what becomes difficult, or not difficult, but a challenge is generally a low-code programmer may breed from another area. So you were a business user, a real tech-savvy business user, and then you became a low-code programmer.
Right.
And that's where a lot of these people are going to come from. Right now, there's not very many hardcore traditional coders who are like jumping over to do low-code. And so the majority, out there are kind of a mix. And so some of these tenets that most developers and coders may learn in school or as they program or other things, you may not get inherently from the low-code developer, especially if you're self-taught. And that goes with development in general.
Yeah,
if
you're
self-taught and you didn't go get a computer science degree, right? There's some things you just may not have experienced or heard of until you got into the field and the job and started working with other professional developers.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think in a lot of cases, and I think you have a special, view on this, what you're learning in computer science isn't necessarily preparing you to be a individual contributor developer on a software project necessarily. You're learning a lot of background. You're learning a lot of core things you need to know, the math and the science and how things work and what,
theory stuff.
Yeah. Well, and you can write a bubble sort, which you won't need in low code, but you can write it, right? Those sorts of things, but you're not necessarily going to come out of that day one ready to walk in and develop in anything. Let alone, walk into a low code environment or into an agile shop that has a really well put together, software development lifecycle that they have everybody that's been there for 3 years has all been doing. And now you're brand new. You're going to struggle in that a little bit. I think though you should talk a little about what you're doing or have done a couple times with Mendix to try to help at the university level to teach students about low code and what you present and kind of give an overview of what that topic or that course is all about.
Right. Yeah. I've had the opportunity to give a guest lecture and present to MIS and almost finance, accounting, and kind of engineering students about software delivery and low code. Right. And so a lot of what we're talking about here comes from that lecture, that content, and definitely we'll share some of that out. But it's really exactly that it's a tool that's there. It allows you to get quickly up on things and be able to build, but the whole process should still be there. And when I speak about this, I make sure I emphasize, I don't just talk about low code. It's a combination low code and software delivery. Right. And the idea is that I explain what low code is, and then I also explain where it fits and how software delivery works. Because while a lot of college students will learn the theory of programming and different things like that, they often don't experience delivery, and that software delivery is a complete discipline unto itself, I think.
That's for sure. I would agree. Yeah. It's probably not taught. Like, I don't know. I have a degree in chemistry, so I didn't do software, engineering or computer science when I was in college. I took a few classes, but not anything major. But we have learned, right? You and I over the last couple of years, that delivery is the ability to take what all of those users are telling you they need and turning that into a functional feature that helps them accomplish whatever their goals are, and putting that in front of them, right? You can sit and build stuff. And I've been in other places that didn't want to have, delivery deadlines. It didn't want to have artificial, we just pick a date out of a hat. We don't want that. We just want to work until it's beautiful. Well, that's about programming. That's not about delivery, right? That's about development. When you just want to, be in your developer utopia and say, hey, it doesn't matter. When this is beautiful and it's perfect, then we'll be ready to give it to customers. Unfortunately, that's not a reality of how most software places are, right? You have to put out product. You have to meet those features because your users have needs and you're trying to fill them with your software product. Internal or external, it doesn't really matter. If you're not delivering, you're not creating value.
So delivery is the key. And as we talked about in remote team management, we measure progress by delivery.
Yeah, very, very much so. And I think that's probably my favorite part about all of software, right? That's what I think about all the time is how do we deliver that? I touched on it earlier, but that is what's important. I think all of the other things that happen in this whole process are amazing and awesome. And I love being involved in the solution design and the the architecture of things. But man, seeing that user interact with your app and get done what they need to do, and then you hear from them, man, that made my day easier. That's what drives me. That's what, I love to see. And however we can get there, back in the day when I worked at homeseekers.com, seeing that we had 100,000 people on the site in a month was like, oh my God. And then we were doing that in a week. And then, we're seeing 1 million people in a month. And we're just like, oh my goodness, right? That was amazing. We built something that people were using every single day. And it hasn't changed, right? I'm still hooked on that. That's my crack, right? I love the fact that we put software out that people use to go get their jobs done. And then again, you have to have that whole process of getting the feedback and making adjustments and fixing the bugs and figuring out how to do things better and faster and make it so that fewer people can get more done using the tools that you're building and delivering so that they can experience more joy or whatever their default feeling is that we've talked about. Hopefully they're choosing joy. But so that they can get there, right? And know that they can get their job done without feeling the stress of, oh my God, I can't believe I have to use this program.
Right. And I love that you put it that way. So that kind of summarizes us, and I'm going to kind of bring us into a recap here. But if Excel is the gateway drug, then the crack is the ultimate of being able to see that you built a program and people are using it, right?
It really is. That's what does it for me. It always has. And that's from way, way, way back in the day when my buddy and I used to write these little text-based programs for each other that you had to go, on your own little text-based adventure. And I'd write one for him. He'd write one for me that we ran on our, computers all the way to now, we have thousands of users a day that are, running through and I don't even know how many, processes are being handled. It's amazing. So yeah, you're going to talk about a recap. So
it's a good feeling for sure.
Yeah. Jump into that.
We talked today about what is low code. We talked about the versatility of the platform, how to decide if a low code project is right for you, some of the differences between rapid development in a low code platform versus traditional development, software development life cycle, people, process, and all that. Next time, we're going to get into some of the specific challenges that we ran into with implementing low code in a large enterprise environment and running essentially all the mission critical systems on basically $1 billion global real estate company in a low code platform and how we were able to get around them and some of the stuff we're still working on.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. That was a great recap. And I would just say for those of you listening, when you're making that choice, do I want to try this in low code? I would say yes, try it, right? Again, don't try to build Tableau. You're not going to be happy. But if you're doing something else, if you have a project, you're like, oh man, let's try a new language. I want to go learn something. Learn low code. Go watch a video about, from the Mendix Academy about a guy who built a task management system in low code. And I think he built it in like 15 minutes. It's the first video I ever watched about Mendix, and I was stunned. and I was hooked.
Yeah, that's so cool.
And
the recent webinar, they built a fitness tracking app using Mendix.
Oh man, see, there you go. I mean, I think that'd be an app that would never get any use on my phone, but still, I'd use it to track the number of drinks I'm not having.
There you go.
Yeah, but that was a really good. I hope everybody enjoyed this. As always, shameless plug. We'd love for you guys to subscribe or follow wherever that may be, whatever platform you're listening on. Thank you. We really do appreciate it. And those of you that are reaching out, it's amazing. We love your feedback. Please continue. Imran and I really enjoy doing this. That's why we keep making these episodes. It's a lot of fun for us. So thank you for joining us on the journey. And thank you. Have a great day.
Yeah, we'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Architect and the Executive, a podcast by Imran Kassam and Steve Ledwith. We hope you enjoyed this episode and encourage you to subscribe to our channel on your favorite podcast platform. All of our episodes, show notes, and articles can be found on our website, thearchitectandtheexecutive.com. Thank you.